Hey dudes, so it seems like my video on Old School 95X has resonated with a few of you, so I figured I would make good on my promise and make a couple deck tech videos. To start with, I want to be clear that I can't say that these are meta decks or the best decks or anything like that. The format is young, and while we can look to other similar formats for inspiration, at the end of the day, the meta is often just as much about player perception as it is the best thing to be doing. So, keep that in mind. This format is new, so all I can really say is that these are functional decks, and hopefully pretty decent. Today, I'm going to be talking about a budget deck, since I find building on a budget to be pretty interesting, and if you don't like the idea of proxying or playing online, then this is one of the cheaper decks you could have that's still max pointed. And the absolute cheapest way to get 10 points in this format is with a Mind Twist and 4 Hymn to Torak. So yes, of course it's a mono black deck. Pretty strong budget deck in most of these formats. Obviously, prices fluctuate and everyone has a different idea of budget, but according to Moxfield, this deck is under $100 including lands. You can get this deck even cheaper if you want, but at a certain point you're just playing with worse cards than everybody else. So, let's take a look at the deck. Okay, so we're gonna start with the creatures, and I'm gonna bounce around a little bit here, but pretty much the biggest investment for this deck is Hypnotic Spectre. This is a quarter of the budget for 4 cards. You could not play Hypnotic Spectre if you wanted to bring the price down quite a bit, which is probably okay, but this is like one of the best creatures in the format, so I would recommend trying to play it. Our high end are 3 Abyssal Specters, which is basically just Hypnotic Spectre, but it costs an extra mana. This is not a super strong card, but it is pretty decent in this list, and it acts as a decent high end for this specific deck and strategy. Otherwise, we have classics like Black Knight, which is a pretty affordable card and quite efficient for the cost, and Order of the Ebon Hand, which is ridiculously cheap and almost as efficient for the cost. And lastly, I also threw 2 Will-O-the-Wisp in here. Now, I don't know if this card is quite worth the price, but I don't know. It's very cheap and it's very efficient. With the regeneration, you can chump block flyers, or non-flyers even, for days with this thing. I didn't want to put more than 2 in, because it's kind of a pricey card. Not super expensive, obviously, but I think that, like, in cases where you don't get a turn 1 hit Dark Ritual into a Hypnotic Spectre or something like that, dropping a turn 1 Will-O-the-Wisp is not a terrible way to start the game. With that, we might as well move to the sorceries, and we'll start with the pointed cards. Mind Twist is a very, very strong card, and it's a surprisingly cheap card for how strong it is, partially because it was banned to fuck everywhere constantly, and they reprinted it a little bit later than they did with most cards. So it doesn't have quite the demand, and there's a decent amount of copies out there. Very strong card, and well worth it in this deck. You won't see this often, obviously, as you only have 1 copy, but it's going to be really good when you do. And then next we have Hymn to Torak. Hymn to Torak is probably the most efficient card in the game for price to power. Maybe that's not entirely true, but as far as most cards, this thing was printed in Fallen Empire, so there's a fuckload of them, and it's like less than 80 cents for a card. And these cost 1.5 points, at least at the recording of this. So 4 of them come up to 6 points, and then the 4 points for the Mind Twist, and that equals your entire deck for 10 points. That's quite a bit of power per point, but also, you know, it's no Black Lotus or anything. Still, for a budget deck, Hymn to Torak, very, very strong card. Even in a non-budget deck, it's pretty strong. But because we're mono black, we don't have to worry about the double black pip cost. And then there are 2 Drain Life in here. These kind of function like a fireball, where you can use it to remove a creature that's problematic. It is not mana efficient to do that, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Otherwise, it can be used to just end the game, or just to give yourself a little bit of life to let you last 1 more turn so that you can end the game. There's 2 more in the sideboard, just in case you want more for some reason. We'll go over the sideboard when we get there. I'm not super confident on it because obviously I don't know the entire meta. It's a brewer's paradise, right? So because of that, sideboard is, who knows. But yeah, those are the sorceries. Then we have Dark Ritual, which is the next most pricey part of the deck. It's not too expensive, obviously, and this card is super powerful. I would, like, Hypnotic Spectre, I would say you can switch it out of the deck if you want to. I don't know that I would say you should do that for Dark Ritual. It is very powerful. But it is, you know, it's a good card. You don't need me to tell you that. It's just an auto-include. Next we'll move to Headstone. Headstone is interesting. This came out in Homelands. I would not call this a strong card, but I would call it a cheap card. And it does a couple of interesting things that you can't really find in other places, at least in this format. It is a slow trip, so it does replace itself, which is huge, and the main reason it's in the list, because it just kind of functions as lowering the number of cards in the deck. But it also removes a card from a graveyard. So if your opponent, you know, played their Black Lotus or something, you can cast this, get it out of the game so they can't do any Time Twister bullshit or anything like that, and you'll have replaced it. Like I said, I don't know that it is a strong card, but I was pretty happy with its performance in my playtesting. But my favorite part about it is that it is cheap as hell, and not the worst card in the world. But let's talk about the artifacts. So, Cormus Bell is a bad card. And this deck is probably better without it, but I think it's fucking hilarious. And as a mono black deck running only swamps, you know, turn 6, turn 7 comes around, the game's drug out, which these games might, because this deck does a lot of disruption. So your opponent kind of can probably get a couple things out, but they are probably going to struggle, at least if you're having a good game. And in those instances, I guess it is kind of win more, but you can play this and then swing in wide. So I do think there are situations where this is maybe decent. It would probably get sided out most games, but you never know. It could also be a better sideboard card, but I like it and I think it's funny. The Rack is a much less embarrassing choice here, and it should be pretty obvious why this is in here. We're running literally every even slightly efficient Discord effect, like, in the format, so the Rack makes sense there. Then for our enchantments, we just run 2 Paralyze. Paralyze is often, I think it's underrated in a lot of instances. Obviously it's not perfect, but as far as removal goes, this is really efficient. Obviously it doesn't actually remove the creature, but like them paying 4 mana to untap something is going to be really good for you. And them spending something to get rid of this is also going to be really good for you. So I think Paralyze is... I like Paralyze more than Terror in most instances, because it hits everything and it's cheaper. Obviously, Terror has some advantages over this, and we have a couple in the sideboard, but I really prefer Paralyze as the removal of choice. But that is pretty much the whole deck. I went with 22 swamps, but you could adjust this number as you saw fit. Technically, our curve is pretty low, so you could maybe bring this down a little bit. I like it better around 22, and you could also argue maybe 24 is more correct, but I think that's going too far. Obviously, if you're going to build a deck like this, don't just take my word for things, do some testing, play test yourself, add your own personality to it. Lower the land count, raise the land count, do whatever you want, but 22 felt right for me and has felt right for my playtesting and has been good in every game that I didn't get, you know, like, land fucked one way or the other. But it happened both ways equally, which leads me to believe maybe this is the right number. The sideboard I'm not super confident on. I'm confident on a couple things. We'll just go over it. 2 more Drain Life, just because we have 2 in the main board was kind of my logic there. I don't know that you would ever actually want 4, but you might, right? Like, without knowing the meta, it's hard to say exactly what you would want, so I just tossed these in as a kind of a contingency, I guess. I don't know. Dry Spell. This one I'm fairly confident on. I think Dry Spell is really good, assuming a decent chunk of people build weenie decks or anything that goes wide. Dry Spell is super efficient against specifically like White Weenie and stuff like that. And then we have Infernal Darkness. I really like Infernal Darkness, and I was surprised how cheap this card is. This thing is, you could kind of think of it as like a Black Blood Moon. It's obviously a little bit different, and in some ways is better because it fucks all land bases. This is probably just something you would side in against anyone that was not playing black, because if you get this down, it's gonna fuck them for a turn or two, or however long you feel like keeping it up. Unless they do have a lot of colorless, I guess then they won't care. And then we have 2 more Paralyze in the board. Paralyze is a pretty solid card. I don't like running too much removal main board because a lot of people like to get cheeky with creatureless decks, and they'll board creatures in game 2 and stuff like that after you've boarded out your swords and all that other stuff. So I don't like to have too much creature removal main board, and just like to side it in if I am running against more creature heavy decks. And then Terror. Terror does some things that Paralyze doesn't, so that's the reason for that. And then Tormod's Crypt. I guess you could replace this with 2 more Headstone if you were feeling that way. I don't know that exiling a person's graveyard is going to be relevant in this format, but if anyone does have the balls to try to make a really funny graveyard deck, I think it has the pieces to do it. I haven't built that myself, so I'm not positive, but that's why I threw that in here. But this could easily be replaced with something else. As far as other considerations, Icequake is pretty solid. Obviously, it's not anywhere near as good as Sinkhole, but it is significantly cheaper than Sinkhole, so if you want to be doing some sort of land destruction, you could put this into the sideboard if you don't want to do it main board. You could also swap this and Knights of Stronghold for the Hypnotic Specters and I guess like the Cormus Bell and maybe the Hardstone, or Headstones rather, if you wanted to go that route. I think running the Hypnotic Spectre is going to be way better in most situations, and this deck would be significantly better with Sinkhole, but it's a budget deck, you know, you do what you can. But if you do feel like you do need at least some sort of land destruction, because there are really powerful lands, Icequake is something you would consider. And likely I would probably put at least 2 of these in the sideboard over Tormod's Crypt, probably. Or maybe even over the Drain Life or something. Something to consider. You do have some access to land destruction. Strip Mine is pointed, so you can't run that unless you wanted to cut some Hymn to Thorax. And it's also an expensive card, so again, these are budget considerations, but Icequake can do in a pinch. And 3 mana to destroy a land is not, like, that's not a terrible rate, right? That's a Stone Rain, and Stone Rain is a pretty playable card. And we don't even care that it's 2 color pips because, you know, mono black. What does that matter? Sengir Vampire is also fairly solid as a card. Like, just a flying 4/4 for 5 mana is pretty good rate. So you could consider adding 1 or 2 of those, or replacing the Abyssal Specters with these if you want. They do cost 1 more mana, but they hit for twice as hard. Just kind of a personal taste there. Knight of Stromgald is literally just Order of the Ebon Hand. Like, they are the same card. Knight of Stromgald just costs more money because there are less copies of it. So, yeah. That's why Order is in the main board and Knight is sitting over here. But they're interchangeable. Like, if you had copies of Knight of Stromgald, you would not need to buy Order of Ebon Hand. You could just use these, or you could put them both in there and get rid of, like I said, the Hypnotic Spectre that costs way more money. That being said, getting rid of the Hypnotic Spectre alone, if you're going to get rid of that, you might want a little bit more flying. I guess that's kind of the deck list. But yeah, this is under $100, which is quite insane in old school, in my opinion. Especially when you're considering that you will be running across like Moxen and Ancestral Recall and stuff like that. But if you don't want to proxy and you aren't super rich and really stupid with your money, yeah, this is a solid way to play. Not saying you're stupid if you buy expensive cards, but I probably wouldn't buy expensive cards and then play with them, personally. no reason to damage like a real Black Lotus, right? But yeah, I guess that's really all I have for you today. If you are interested in this format, the Discord to it will be in the description. I'm assuming most of you have seen my other video. At least I'm hoping this is getting served to the people that saw that video. So you probably already know all that, but this is specifically for that new format I talked about in that video. But yeah, that's all I have. So if you like this video, you can like it, you can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.